There are places on Earth that do not merely contain silence, they enforce it. Antarctica is one of those places. It is not silent in the gentle way forests fall quiet at dusk, nor in the peaceful way oceans calm at night. Antarctica's silence feels deliberate, heavy, almost engineered. A vast continent where sound does not travel freely and thought itself seems to slow, as though the environment resists intrusion. Distance there is not just measured in miles but in endurance, patience, and isolation. Long before research stations anchored themselves to the ice, long before aircraft traced temporary lines across its frozen sky, Antarctica existed as a margin, a blank space at the edge of the world. Early maps did not describe it, they avoided it. A white nothingness at the bottom of the page, not because nothing existed there, but because nothing human could remain long enough to explain it. For centuries, Antarctica was not a destination. It was a boundary. A place where imagination wandered freely because certainty could not survive. And yet, within that overwhelming emptiness, something appeared. Not movement. Not life. But shape. When modern satellite imagery first began circulating beyond restricted scientific archives and into public view, the expectation was simple. White plains. Buried ridgelines. The vague silhouettes of mountains crushed under kilometers of ice. What appeared instead was something that disrupted that expectation entirely. A dark form rising sharply from the snow. Angular. Geometric. Unmistakably triangular. At first glance, it seemed almost mundane, just another mountain peak exposed by shifting ice. Antarctica is full of mountains hidden beneath glacier. But the longer observers studied the images, the less comfortable that explanation became. This shape did not look worn. It did not look fractured. It did not look random. It looked intentional. Its edges appeared unnaturally straight. Its faces seemed smooth, as though shaped rather than eroded. Its shadow fell with a symmetry that felt measured rather than accidental. And the most unsettling detail of all was not what people saw, it was what they felt. A quiet pressure. A hesitation. A subtle awareness that the geometry on the screen did not belong to the chaotic language of nature. Almost immediately, debate ignited. Some insisted the explanation was obvious. Antarctica contains nunataks, mountain peaks carved into triangular shapes by intersecting glacier. Freeze-thaw cycles sharpen ridges. Wind sculpts faces. Light exaggerates angles. Nature, they argued, is capable of remarkable symmetry. Others stared longer. They compared the shape to structures found far from polar ice, in deserts, jungles, river valleys, and ancient flood plains. They recognized the silhouette instantly, not because they wanted to, but because humanity has seen it before. A pyramid. The idea should have collapsed under scrutiny. Antarctica is the last place on Earth where a structure should survive for thousands of years. It is a continent designed to erase. Stone fractures under extreme cold. Metal corrodes rapidly. Human presence vanishes almost immediately beneath storms that sweep across the plateau like invisible blades. And yet, there it was. A dark triangular form staring back through the ice. The scientific response arrived quickly, as it always does when uncertainty threatens comfort. Glacier-carved mountains. Illusions form through shadow and perspective. Resolution limitations exaggerate symmetry. These explanations were not unreasonable, but they were not satisfying either. Because even experts understood how rare it is for nature to imitate intention so closely. Across forums, academic circles, and private discussions, reactions followed the same pattern. First disbelief. Then curiosity. And finally, a question few were willing to ask aloud. What if this shape is not an illusion? What if it is evidence of a chapter of history humanity has not yet opened? A chapter buried beneath ice long before recorded memory began. No one wanted to leap to conclusions. But no one could dismiss the unease either. Antarctica is not supposed to be a cradle of civilization. It is supposed to be untouched. Uninhabitable. Static. A place where cold preserves emptiness, not memory. So why does a continent without ruins, without cities, without any trace of human settlement, display a form that resembles deliberate construction? If the shape is natural, the mystery ends quickly. If it is not, history becomes unstable. Entire timelines shift. Origins blur. The story of humanity fractures. Because such a discovery would not simply add a footnote to history, it would demand that history be rewritten. And that is the question that refuses to disappear. Hovering at the edge of every discussion surrounding the so-called Black Pyramids of Antarctica. Lingering like a shadow stretched across the ice, waiting for someone to look just a little longer and ask the one question no one is supposed to ask. What if the simplest explanation is wrong? Because this mystery did not begin with explorers, or expeditions, or physical discovery. It began with pixels. With images captured hundreds of miles above the Earth, images that were never meant to reveal anything extraordinary, yet somehow did. The mystery of Antarctica's Black Pyramids did not begin with explorers carving paths through ice or scientists standing on frozen ground with instruments in their hands. It began quietly, impersonally, without ceremony. It began with pixels. Hundreds of miles above the surface of the Earth, satellites passed over the southern continent as they always had, scanning, mapping, recording data meant to be routine. Their purpose was not discovery, but documentation. They were designed to observe ice thickness, track glacial movement, measure temperature variation, and identify geological features buried beneath snow. What they were not designed to do was provoke existential questions. Yet that is exactly what happened. When the images first surfaced, they did not behave like ordinary satellite photographs. They did not disappear into academic archives or remain confined to technical reports. Instead, they moved. They spread across forums, research communities, and eventually into public awareness. Each repost introduced the images to new eyes, and with every viewing, interpretations multiplied rather than settled. At the center of the debate were several triangular formations located along the Ellsworth Mountains, a remote range in West Antarctica. At first glance, they appeared to be peaks, partially exposed above the ice sheet. Antarctica contains many such peaks, known as nunataks, and most attract little attention. But these were different. The formations appeared isolated, standing apart from surrounding terrain rather than blending into it. Their faces looked smooth, lacking the jagged irregularities typically associated with eroded rock. Their edges seemed unnervingly straight. And perhaps most disturbing of all, their proportions appeared consistent, almost measured. One image showed a structure with three clearly visible faces, each rising cleanly to a central point. Another displayed a near-perfect triangular silhouette, symmetrical enough to challenge coincidence. A third formation, located miles away, appeared aligned with the others in a way that some observers found difficult to ignore. Individually, each image could be dismissed. Together, they formed a pattern. And patterns are dangerous things. The internet responded instantly. Some viewers were certain they were seeing evidence of a forgotten civilization, remnants of structures built long before ice consumed the continent. Others suggested the formations were markers, not buildings, placed intentionally for reasons now lost to time. A smaller but vocal group proposed ideas even more radical, suggesting the shapes predated humanity itself. But science entered the conversation just as quickly. Geologists explained that such formations were not unusual. They introduced diagrams showing how intersecting glacier carved pyramidal peaks over long periods. They pointed to famous examples like the Matterhorn, a mountain whose iconic triangular shape formed entirely through natural erosion. They emphasized perspective, resolution, and the distortions created by satellite imaging. Nature, they insisted, is fully capable of producing geometry. And on paper, the explanation made sense. But explanations are not always conclusions. Instead of resolving the debate, the scientific response intensified it. Because the question was no longer whether nature could produce triangular shapes, it was whether nature could produce this level of precision in this place with this consistency. How perfect can natural geometry become? And how often does it appear in one of the most hostile environments on Earth? Another problem emerged almost immediately: perspective. Satellite images flatten reality. Depth is inferred through shadow, not directly observed. A smooth face from space may be jagged up close. A straight edge may curve when viewed from ground level. Every pixel is a compromise between distance and clarity. Yet this ambiguity did not weaken the mystery. It strengthened it. Because no one was stepping forward with a definitive answer. Scientists disagreed among themselves. Some argued the formations were typical nunataks. Others admitted, reluctantly, that the shapes appeared unusually crisp. A few noted that their alignment was intriguing, though not conclusive. The debate quickly evolved into a confrontation between worldviews. On one side stood those who trust established geological processes. For them, the burden of proof rested entirely on anyone proposing artificial origin. Extraordinary claims, they argued, require extraordinary evidence. On the other side were those who believed that human history is far less complete than textbooks suggest. They argued that science itself is shaped by assumptions, and that Antarctica is assumed to have no human past. Any discovery there is therefore interpreted as natural by default. If we assume no civilization ever existed in Antarctica, then every shape must be geological. But what if that assumption is wrong? This tension became visible in nearly every discussion. A scientist would say the slopes appear too steep to be artificial. A theorist would respond that ancient cultures may have built structures we no longer understand. A skeptic would argue the image resolution is insufficient. A believer would counter that the clarity is more than enough. Beneath every argument lingered an uncomfortable possibility. That neither side was entirely correct. That the formations were not simple mountains, and not necessarily pyramids built by an ancient civilization either. They could be something else. Something unnamed. As interest grew, enhanced versions of the images began circulating. Contrast was increased. Shadows were sharpened. Glare was reduced. Digital analysts attempted to extract detail from limited data. Each enhancement revealed new features, some supporting the pyramid hypothesis, others undermining it. At one point, three-dimensional reconstructions were created using shadow gradients to estimate depth. The resulting models appeared shockingly architectural. Defined faces. Consistent slopes. Angles approaching geometric precision. But when professional geologists reviewed these reconstructions, they dismissed them. Too many assumptions, they said. Too much interpolation. Too much trust in algorithms rather than reality. Still, no alternative explanation fully satisfied. And so the images remained suspended in uncertainty. Official research groups showed little interest in further investigation. The region is remote. The terrain dangerous. The climate unforgiving. Any expedition would require enormous funding and months of preparation. Government saw no justification. Universities could not defend the cost. Private organizations could not obtain permission. A mountain, they argued, is just a mountain. But the photographs refused to behave. They sat in public databases, accessible to anyone with curiosity and patience. They were too precise to ignore, and too ambiguous to confirm. They existed at the boundary between belief and doubt, where mystery thrives. And that is why this question endures. Not because evidence is absent, but because evidence resists interpretation. The formations do not offer clarity. They offer tension. They force us to confront the limits of both science and speculation. They remind us that sometimes truth is not hidden by secrecy, but by circumstance, by distance, by ice, by the simple reality that no one is able or willing to go and look. The satellite images remain silent. They show shapes that should not feel intentional, yet do. Shadows that fall too evenly. Angles that align too cleanly. And so the question grows louder. If these formations are simply mountains, why do they not resemble other Antarctic mountains? And if they are not mountains, then what exactly is rising through the ice? Because before we can answer that question, we must confront an uncomfortable truth. Whenever something unexplained appears in a remote part of the world, geology arrives first, not always to explain, but sometimes to protect. Whenever an unexplained shape appears in a remote corner of the world, geology arrives first. This is not a criticism. It is instinct. The Earth has been shaping itself for billions of years. Mountains rise, glacier carve valleys, wind erodes stone, ice fractures rock, and gravity pulls everything downward given enough time. Patterns emerge not because something intends them, but because physical laws repeat relentlessly. From this perspective, nothing about a triangular mountain should surprise us. And yet, there are moments when geology begins to feel less like a science and more like a shield. A shield designed not to deceive, but to protect our understanding of the world from questions that threaten to complicate everything we think we know. That uneasy feeling sits at the heart of the debate surrounding Antarctica's Black Pyramids. When the satellite images first spread, geologists responded swiftly and confidently. They identified the formations as pyramidal nunataks, mountain peaks exposed above the ice sheet, sharpened by glacier eroding their sides from multiple directions. The process is well documented. As glacier move down valleys, they carve steep faces. When several glacier intersect around a central peak, the result can be a triangular or pyramidal shape. They pointed to famous examples: the Matterhorn, Mount Assiniboine, St. Elias peaks. Nature, they said, does this all the time. Diagrams followed. Cross-sections showing intersecting cirques. Illustrations explaining freeze-thaw cycles. Comparative photographs of mountains around the world with triangular silhouettes. The explanation was delivered with the authority of decades of study. Case closed. Except, it wasn't. Because for many observers, the geological explanation felt too clean. Too convenient. Almost rehearsed. Nature rarely produces perfection. It approaches symmetry, hints at geometry, flirts with balance, but it almost never achieves the level of consistency seen in the Antarctic images. The edges of the formations appear unusually straight. The slopes rise with remarkable uniformity. The faces look smooth, as though shaped by intention rather than chance. Even some geologists, speaking privately, admitted discomfort. Not denial, discomfort. The formations appeared unusually crisp. This is where the discussion becomes strange. Those who question the geological explanation are not rejecting geology itself. They are questioning whether geology alone can explain every detail. The Earth is capable of astonishing formations. Hexagonal basalt columns rise like engineered structures. Perfectly circular craters scar landscapes. Ice caves form arches that resemble cathedrals. Nature is capable of wonder. But the question is not whether nature can create shapes. It is whether nature can create these shapes, here, with this level of precision. One of the most common defenses of the geological explanation focuses on snow. Smooth snow cover, critics argue, can hide irregularities in rock. It can exaggerate straight lines. Shadows can sharpen angles. Low-resolution imagery can flatten complexity. In other words, the perfection may be an illusion created by distance and perspective. But this argument cuts both ways. If snow can hide imperfections, it can also hide details. What if the snow conceals features that are not geological at all? What if shadows reveal structure rather than distortion? What if the limitations of satellite imagery obscure something that only becomes apparent when the question itself is allowed to exist? The deeper critics explore the geological explanation, the more it begins to resemble a default position rather than a conclusion. A response selected not because it answers every question, but because it prevents new ones from forming. Geology offers safety. It preserves the narrative that Antarctica has no human past. It ensures that the continent remains what we expect it to be, untouched, empty, irrelevant to civilization. And that expectation shapes interpretation long before evidence is examined. If one begins with the assumption that no civilization ever existed in Antarctica, then every shape must be natural. But assumptions are not evidence. And within geology itself, inconsistencies begin to appear. The slopes of the Antarctic formation seem too evenly eroded for structures that should have endured millions of years of extreme weather. Nearby mountains do not exhibit the same degree of symmetry. The surrounding terrain appears chaotic, fractured, random, exactly what one would expect from glacial carving, yet the pyramidal shapes stand apart, almost isolated from that randomness. If glacier carved these forms, why did they not carve similar shapes across the entire region? Why are these structures so localized? Why do they appear almost alone, surrounded by formations that lack the same precision? Glacial erosion does not typically produce isolation. It produces consistency. Valleys, ridges, and peaks reflect the same processes across wide areas. But here, the landscape feels selective, as though something resisted erosion differently. The alignment of the formations raises further questions. Natural processes favor randomness. Yet the pyramidal shapes appear positioned in ways that invite comparison, even suggestion of pattern. Not proof, but pressure. And pressure matters. The geological explanation can account for some features, but not all. It explains triangular silhouettes but struggles with smooth faces. It explains erosion but struggles with uniformity. It explains mountains but struggles with isolation. This is where psychology enters the conversation. Science is built on caution. When faced with uncertainty, it offers the simplest explanation first. This is not weakness, it is wisdom. Extraordinary claims do require extraordinary evidence. But the simplest explanation is not always the correct one. History is full of examples where consensus delayed discovery. Meteorites were dismissed as superstition. Continental drift was mocked. Ancient civilizations were underestimated. Each time, the simplest explanation eventually gave way to evidence that forced a rewrite. The resistance to questioning geology does not come from ignorance. It comes from fear of implication. If the formations are not natural, then history becomes incomplete. If geology is wrong here, then what else might be wrong? If Antarctica holds something unexpected, then how much of the past have we misunderstood? These are destabilizing questions. And destabilization is not something institutions welcome. Geology, in this context, becomes more than a science. It becomes a boundary. A line drawn around acceptable interpretation. The Black Pyramids push against that line. They do not prove anything. They do not confirm ancient builders or lost civilizations. But they expose the limits of certainty. They remind us that science is not a collection of final answers, but a process shaped by what we are willing to question. For now, geology has offered its explanation. A reasonable hypothesis rooted in known processes. But the argument remains incomplete. Too many details remain unanswered. Too many features remain unusually precise. Too many questions remain quietly unresolved. The pyramids do not fit comfortably within the framework science prefers. They whisper of something more than erosion and ice. And so we arrive at the next layer of the mystery, not the shapes themselves, but the place that surrounds them. Because if there is anywhere on Earth capable of hiding a truth so completely that no one could verify or disprove it, it is not a desert, or a jungle, or the ocean floor. It is Antarctica. Because Antarctica is not just remote, it is sealed. And a sealed continent is the perfect place to bury a chapter of history so deeply that even asking about it feels forbidden. The Black Pyramids of Antarctica do not demand belief. They do not ask to be accepted as evidence of lost civilizations or rejected as tricks of light and ice. What they demand is attention. They sit at the edge of certainty, too precise to ignore, too remote to verify, too disruptive to explore without consequence. Science explains them, yet hesitates. Skepticism dismisses them, yet cannot fully erase the discomfort they produce. Every explanation offered seems to close one door while quietly opening another. And perhaps that is the real significance of these structures. Not what they are, but where they are. Antarctica is not simply another continent. It is a barrier. A sealed archive. A place designed by nature itself to resist discovery. Storms erase tracks. Ice buries landscapes. Time compresses memory beneath kilometers of frozen silence. If the Earth wanted to hide something, not temporarily, but permanently, this is where it would do so. This is why the Black Pyramids feel so unsettling. Because they exist in the only place on the planet where proof is nearly impossible and denial is effortless. A place where anomalies can survive without explanation, where questions can exist without answers, and where history can remain incomplete without contradiction. The formations may be mountains. They may be illusions. They may be something else entirely. But the deeper truth remains unchanged. Antarctica has not always been what it is today. Beneath the ice lie mountains no one has seen, rivers that no longer flow, forests that once lived in darkness, lakes sealed off from the world for millions of years, and geological scars that tell stories far older than humanity's memory. The continent has transformed so completely that its past is almost unrecognizable. And that transformation raises a final, unavoidable thought. If the land itself can forget entire worlds, how difficult would it be for it to forget a civilization? Part 1 does not claim that such a civilization existed. It does not declare the pyramids artificial. It does not rewrite history. It does something more dangerous. It shows that certainty is fragile. It shows that our understanding of the past depends not only on evidence, but on access. And Antarctica denies access better than any place on Earth. So the pyramids remain, not as answers, but as fractures in the story we tell ourselves about where humanity began and what the planet has erased along the way. And now the question shifts. Because before we can ask who might have built something in Antarctica, or when, or why, we must confront something even more unsettling. What if Antarctica was not always a frozen tomb? What if it was once alive? What if the ice did not just bury the land, but sealed away an entire chapter of Earth's history? In Part 2, we will leave the surface behind and descend beneath the ice itself, into a hidden world of subglacial mountains, buried river systems, ancient forests, and lakes that have survived in complete darkness for millions of years. Because once you understand what Antarctica used to be, the idea that something once lived, or was built, there no longer feels impossible. Just forgotten. Antarctica did not always belong to ice. This fact alone destabilizes almost everything we assume about the southern continent. Today, Antarctica appears eternal in its frozen state, as though it has always been a land without life, without warmth, without history. But the evidence buried beneath its ice tells a very different story, one so unfamiliar that even specialists struggle to reconcile it with the world we know. Long before Antarctica became the coldest place on Earth, it was alive. Not marginally alive. Not temporarily habitable. But thriving. Scientific confirmation of this truth did not come from myths or speculation. It came from ice cores, long cylinders drilled from deep within the Antarctic ice sheet, each layer preserving a snapshot of Earth's past. These frozen archives revealed something extraordinary. Trapped within the ice were grains of pollen. Spores from ancient plants. Chemical signatures that could only have formed in warm, humid conditions. Pollen does not lie. It cannot drift across continents and embed itself thousands of meters beneath ice without origin. It must come from nearby vegetation. And the pollen discovered in Antarctica did not belong to grasses or mosses capable of surviving polar extremes. It came from trees. Flowering plants. Dense forests. At one point in Earth's history, Antarctica supported ecosystems comparable to modern temperate regions. Rivers flowed across its surface. Soil developed and matured. Forests stood beneath skies that alternated between long summer light and extended winter darkness. This was not speculation. It was chemistry. It was biology. It was evidence extracted from beneath kilometers of frozen silence. Further discoveries deepened the contradiction. Radar surveys conducted beneath the ice revealed vast river systems carved into bedrock. Not small channels, but expansive networks resembling the drainage systems of continents we recognize today. These rivers once carried enormous volumes of water, shaping valleys and plains over long periods of stability. Such formations cannot exist without sustained warmth. Antarctica was not briefly thawed. It was stable enough to evolve. And that realization raises a question that quietly reshapes the entire discussion surrounding the Black Pyramids. If Antarctica was once warm, then it was once habitable. And if it was habitable, then the idea that it could have hosted life, complex life, is no longer radical. It becomes logical. Of course, timelines matter. Mainstream science places Antarctica's lush periods tens of millions of years in the past, long before modern humans existed. That is often where the conversation stops. But geology does not operate on certainty, it operates on models. And models are only as accurate as the assumptions behind them. What the evidence truly shows is not a single warm age, but multiple climatic transitions. The Antarctic continent experienced cycles. Periods of warmth followed by cooling. Retreating ice followed by advancing glacier. These transitions were not always slow or gentle. Ice core records reveal abrupt shifts, dramatic changes in temperature occurring over decades, not millennia. Entire environments vanished rapidly. Forests died. Rivers froze. Landscapes were sealed beneath advancing ice. This is not a hypothetical scenario. It is recorded in the chemistry of the ice itself. And when environments collapse suddenly, they do not erase everything equally. Organic life disappears quickly. Stone endures. Structures persist. The deeper researchers probed beneath the ice, the stranger the picture became. Hidden beneath Antarctica lies a mountain range comparable in scale to the European Alps, the Gamburtsev Mountains. These peaks are not eroded ruins. They are sharp, angular, and strikingly young in appearance. Mountains typically soften over time, worn down by erosion. But these peaks appear preserved, almost frozen in their prime. The only force capable of such preservation is ice. The ice sheet did not destroy the landscape beneath it, it sealed it. This realization fundamentally alters how we interpret anomalies on the surface. The Black Pyramids do not exist in isolation. They exist above a continent that is already known to hide entire worlds beneath its frozen shell. Mountains unseen. Valleys untouched. Rivers remembered only by radar echoes. Antarctica is not empty. It is layered. And those layers matter. Because when we speak of lost civilizations or forgotten histories, we often imagine ruins exposed to wind and rain, gradually crumbling into dust. Antarctica offers something far more unsettling. Perfect preservation. Anything buried beneath its ice during a rapid freeze would remain suspended in time. Not decayed. Not eroded. Not reclaimed by vegetation. Simply sealed. This is why the idea of structures beneath Antarctica refuses to disappear. Not because we have proof, but because the environment makes survival possible. The continent did not merely freeze. It locked itself. And locked places are dangerous to certainty. The question is no longer whether Antarctica could hide something. The question becomes, what would it take for us to ever know if it did? Because the ice does not yield easily. To understand why Antarctica unsettles historians and scientists alike, one must abandon the idea that ice is merely destructive. Ice does not always erase. In certain conditions, it preserves with ruthless efficiency. In temperate regions, time dismantles everything. Rain fractures stone. Roots tear foundations apart. Wind grinds monuments into sediment. Civilizations collapse not only because people disappear, but because the environment reclaims what was built. Antarctica does not reclaim. It entombs. When the climate shifts suddenly, ice advances not as a slow blanket, but as a wall. It seals landscapes rapidly, pressing down with immense force, locking everything beneath it into a state of suspended existence. This is why scientists recover perfectly preserved organisms from deep ice, bacteria hundreds of thousands of years old that remain viable when thawed. This is why meteorites survive Antarctica better than almost anywhere else on Earth. And this is why the continent is uniquely suited to hide history. Radar imaging has revealed that beneath the ice sheet lies a terrain more complex than many exposed continents. Subglacial lakes stretch for hundreds of kilometers, sealed beneath ice caps thick enough to crush cities. Lake Vostok, one of the largest, has been isolated from the surface for millions of years. No sunlight. No atmospheric exchange. And yet, it remains liquid, warmed by geothermal heat rising from the Earth's interior. Life persists in places we once believed impossible. That fact alone should force humility. But humility is not the same as curiosity, and curiosity is often constrained by practicality. Antarctica is not merely difficult to explore, it is prohibitively expensive, politically regulated, and environmentally protected. The Antarctic Treaty restricts excavation, construction, and exploration. Entire regions are designated as off-limits. Officially, this is to preserve the environment. Unofficially, it ensures that very little changes. No one denies the importance of preservation. Antarctica is a global climate regulator, a scientific treasure. But protection also creates silence. And silence allows questions to fade. Except some questions refuse to fade. Beneath the ice, radar has mapped symmetrical ridges, flat plateaus, and sharp-edged formations that defy easy categorization. Most are labeled geological by default. Some are left unexplained. A few are quietly ignored. Because once you accept that Antarctica was once warm, and once you accept that it froze rapidly, and once you accept that ice preserves rather than destroys, the idea of ancient structures beneath the surface stops sounding like science fiction. It starts sounding like a logistical problem. Could humans have built something there? Mainstream timelines say no. Homo sapiens emerged roughly 300,000 years ago. Antarctica's last major warm period is often placed millions of years earlier. But timelines are not fixed truths. Archaeology has repeatedly underestimated the age of human activity. Sites once believed to be 10,000 years old are now dated at 30,000 or more. Advanced tool use appears earlier with every new discovery. Human migration patterns have been revised again and again. We are learning, slowly, that humanity's story is far longer and far more complex than previously believed. And Antarctica has not yet been allowed to participate in that story. Not meaningfully. No large-scale archaeological surveys exist beneath its ice. No systematic exploration of subglacial anomalies has been undertaken with historical intent. The continent is studied as a climate system, not as a cultural archive. Which means an entire category of questions remains unasked. If humans, or human-like civilizations, existed earlier than we currently accept, where would their traces survive? Not in rainforests. Not in river deltas. Not in coastal plains consumed by rising seas. Those places erase memory. Ice does not. The Black Pyramids, whether natural or not, exist at the surface, exposed just enough to provoke curiosity, yet distant enough to deny confirmation. But they may not be isolated anomalies. They may be markers of something buried deeper, sealed beneath kilometers of ice that no drill has ever reached. And this is where the narrative grows uncomfortable. Because ice does not discriminate. It does not choose what to preserve. It simply advances. If something existed in Antarctica before the freeze, whether primitive settlements, advanced structures, or something we do not yet recognize, it would not have had time to decay. It would not have been dismantled. It would not have been reclaimed by forests or oceans. It would have been locked. Frozen in place. And that means Antarctica may not just be hiding landscapes, it may be hiding moments. Moments of civilization interrupted mid-existence. Moments of collapse unrecorded by history. Moments that challenge the linear story we tell ourselves about progress. This is not an argument. It is a possibility. One that becomes harder to dismiss with every piece of data extracted from beneath the ice. The continent we see today is a mask. A temporary state. Beneath it lies a version of Earth that no human has ever walked upon, but which once may have been walked freely. And that realization leads us to the most dangerous thought of all. If Antarctica was once accessible, and if it froze suddenly, and if ice preserves what it buries, then whatever existed there did not vanish. It was simply sealed away. There is a fundamental mistake we make when we imagine ancient history. We imagine slowness. We imagine civilizations rising gradually, thriving for thousands of years, and then fading quietly into myth. But the Earth does not always allow such gentle endings. Catastrophe does not announce itself. Climate does not negotiate. When environmental thresholds are crossed, collapse can be sudden, violent, and absolute. Antarctica's transformation was not poetic. It was catastrophic. Geological evidence indicates that once global temperatures dropped past a critical point, ice advanced with overwhelming speed. Snow accumulated faster than it could melt. Glacier thickened. Ice sheets expanded outward from the interior, crushing forests, flooding valleys, and sealing terrain beneath kilometers of frozen mass. This was not a slow retreat into winter. It was an ending. Entire ecosystems were erased in geological moments. Species vanished not because they failed to adapt, but because adaptation became irrelevant. The land did not gradually empty, it was forced into silence. If anything had been built there, it would not have been dismantled. It would have been buried. This is the distinction that makes Antarctica uniquely disturbing. Other continents recycle history. Antarctica archives it. And archives do not forget, they only delay access. Human history, as we currently understand it, is shaped by survivorship bias. We study what remains. We build narratives around what endured. We mistake absence of evidence for evidence of absence. But Antarctica creates absence by design. No ruins are visible because no ruins can surface. No artifacts are recovered because excavation is nearly impossible. No cultural layers are examined because the ice denies stratigraphy. The continent removes itself from the archaeological record. Which means the question of whether something once existed there remains unanswered, not disproven. And that difference matters. It matters because the Black Pyramids are not anomalies in a vacuum. They exist within a context we barely understand. A continent with buried rivers, hidden mountains, preserved ecosystems, and sealed lakes, a continent proven to have once been habitable. The pyramids may not be structures. But if they are not, then they are remarkably positioned reminders of how little we know. And if they are structures, even partially shaped by intelligent hands, then the implications expand beyond Antarctica. They challenge the chronology of civilization itself. They suggest that advanced organization may not be exclusive to our current epoch. That knowledge may have risen and fallen before. That intelligence may have encountered extinction long before history began recording names and dates. This is where resistance hardens. Because such ideas threaten more than academic comfort. They threaten identity. Humanity defines itself by being the first, the builders, the origin point of intelligence. To accept that something came before, something capable of shaping stone, feels destabilizing. And so we default to safety. We call it geology. We call it coincidence. We call it illusion. We explain away discomfort rather than confront uncertainty. But Antarctica does not offer reassurance. It offers silence. Silence thick enough to bury questions. Silence deep enough to preserve truths. Silence strong enough to outlast civilizations. And buried within that silence may be answers we are not prepared to hear. Because if Antarctica hides more than ice, if it hides memory, then history is not incomplete by accident. It is incomplete by geography. And that is where Part 1 and Part 2 finally converge. The Black Pyramids are not important because they might be artificial. They are important because they force us to ask whether the past we know is the only past that ever existed. They force us to confront a planet capable of erasing entire chapters while leaving behind just enough traces to unsettle the present. Antarctica does not argue. It waits. Maps are supposed to reveal. They outline terrain, define borders, and transform unknown space into navigable reality. But throughout history, maps have also concealed. They simplify, omit, and sometimes deliberately erase what does not fit the story of the present. Antarctica's maps are among the most deceptive ever created. At first glance, they appear detailed ice thickness models, elevation contours, subglacial topography rendered through radar and gravitational measurements. But these maps are not maps of land. They are maps of ice. The continent beneath is not directly shown, it is inferred, approximated, filtered through layers of interpretation. What lies beneath remains abstract. This abstraction creates distance. And distance breeds dismissal. When anomalies appear, symmetrical ridges, flat plateaus, sharp-edged elevations, they are reduced to data points rather than investigated as places. Coordinates replace context. Labels replace curiosity. A formation is not explored. It is classified. This is the architecture of silence. Antarctica is governed not only by ice, but by policy. The Antarctic Treaty System, established to preserve the continent for peaceful scientific use, restricts nearly every form of excavation and construction. No nation owns Antarctica. No private entity may explore freely. Archaeology, by its nature invasive, exists in a legal grey zone. Officially, this protects the environment. Practically, it freezes inquiry. No one is suggesting a conspiracy. There is no single authority hiding secrets beneath the ice. The suppression of curiosity does not require intent, only structure. When access is limited, questions expire on their own. And Antarctica is the most restricted landscape on Earth. To reach even a modest location requires extraordinary funding, international approval, logistical support, and months of preparation. To excavate beneath ice kilometers thick requires technology few organizations possess, and justification even fewer can provide. This creates a paradox. Antarctica is the most studied continent in terms of climate science, yet one of the least explored in terms of human history. The assumption that nothing cultural ever existed there becomes self-reinforcing. Because nothing is sought, nothing is found. And because nothing is found, nothing is sought. This circular certainty is fragile. History reminds us that absence is not proof. Entire civilizations have been forgotten simply because they did not build in materials that survived. Others vanished beneath oceans when sea levels rose. Some were erased by conquest. Others were overwritten by myth. Antarctica offers a different kind of erasure. It buries without destroying. It hides without scattering. It preserves without revealing. And this makes it uniquely incompatible with archaeology as we practice it. Our methods rely on exposure. Antarctica denies exposure. Which means the continent exists outside the historical process. That alone should trouble us. Because history is not just what happened, it is what we are able to uncover. And Antarctica has not yet allowed itself to be uncovered. The Black Pyramids sit at the edge of this paradox. Visible enough to provoke, distant enough to deny certainty. They exist where geology, climate science, policy, and history intersect and cancel each other out. No discipline fully claims them. No discipline fully investigates them. They remain suspended. This suspension is not accidental. It mirrors how Antarctica itself is treated, as a system, not a story. As data, not memory. But memory does not disappear simply because it is inconvenient. It waits. Beneath the ice, radar continues to reveal a world that contradicts surface assumptions. Flat expanses where chaos should reign. Sharp boundaries where erosion should dominate. Linear features where randomness should prevail. Most are explained away. Some are left unexplained. Very few are questioned openly. Because questioning Antarctica changes the scale of the past. If the continent was once green, then life flourished there. If life flourished there, then intelligence could have arisen. If intelligence arose there, then civilization is not confined to our current geography. And if civilization is not confined to our geography, then the human story is incomplete. That realization does not threaten science. It threatens certainty. And certainty is comfortable. The resistance to alternative interpretations of Antarctica is not rooted in fear of truth, but in fear of complexity. A past with multiple rises and collapses is harder to teach, harder to categorize, harder to control. But the planet does not care about narrative simplicity. It records what happens, then buries it. Antarctica is not empty. It is unresolved. Every kilometer of ice represents time we have not accessed. Every sealed lake represents ecosystems untouched by modern influence. Every subglacial mountain represents terrain no eye has seen. And possibly, every unexplained structure represents a question postponed rather than answered. The Black Pyramids may ultimately be geological. They may be illusions shaped by ice and shadow. But their true significance lies elsewhere. They expose a flaw in our certainty. They remind us that knowledge depends not only on evidence, but on permission to look, to dig, to question. Antarctica withholds that permission. And so history pauses at its edge. Because the next question is no longer geological. It is historical. If Antarctica was once habitable, if it froze rapidly, if ice preserves rather than destroys, and if exploration is restricted, then the most important question becomes unavoidable. Who decided that Antarctica would remain unexplored, and when? In Part 3, we will trace early maps, forgotten expeditions, classified discoveries, and historical anomalies that suggest Antarctica may have been known long before modern science officially discovered it. Because some maps show a continent without ice. And maps, unlike myths, do not imagine what they have never seen. History tells us that Antarctica was discovered late. Very late. According to the official narrative, the southern continent remained unseen and unknown until the early 19th century. Explorers braved uncharted seas, endured unimaginable cold, and finally laid eyes upon a frozen land no human had ever recorded before. This version of events is neat, linear, and comforting. It is also incomplete. Because long before Antarctica appeared in expedition journals, it appeared somewhere far more dangerous. On maps. Not vague sketches. Not speculative coastlines. But detailed representations, showing land where no land was supposed to exist. The problem with maps is that they are difficult to dismiss. Unlike myths or legends, maps are practical tools. They are created for navigation, trade, and survival. Cartographers did not invent coastlines for entertainment. Every line carried consequence. And some of those lines point south. In 1513, Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis compiled a world map on gazelle skin. Much of it depicted known coastlines of Europe, Africa, and the Americas. But one section stood apart. A southern landmass, detailed with mountain ranges and coastlines, appearing where Antarctica would later be confirmed to exist. At first glance, skeptics dismissed it as a distorted extension of South America. But closer inspection raised problems. The coastline did not match South America. The orientation was wrong. The contours suggested a separate landmass. More unsettling still was the claim written directly on the map itself. Piri Reis stated that his work was compiled from much older sources, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great, others even earlier. He did not claim discovery. He claimed inheritance. This is where history becomes uncomfortable. Because if the Piri Reis map depicts Antarctica, then the continent was known centuries before its official discovery. And if it was known, then someone had seen it. More maps followed. The Orance Fine map of 1531 showed a massive southern continent labeled Terra Australis, complete with rivers, mountains, and internal geography. This was not a frozen wasteland. It was a living land, detailed with features that would later be confirmed beneath Antarctic ice using radar. The Boische map of 1737 went even further. It depicted Antarctica as two separate landmasses divided by a central sea, a feature that modern science would only confirm centuries later with subglacial surveys. These maps were not guesses. They were accurate in ways they should not have been. The rivers they showed matched subglacial river systems now detected beneath the ice. The mountain ranges aligned with buried formations. The continental outline matched Antarctica without its ice sheet, a version of the land no modern human had ever seen. This raises a question history prefers not to ask. How could ancient cartographers map a continent that modern science can only visualize using advanced technology? One explanation is coincidence. Another is error. But coincidence does not repeatedly align with future discovery. An error does not consistently produce accuracy. Maps are either wrong or based on information. And information comes from observation. Which means someone, at some point, saw Antarctica not as ice, but as land. This is where conventional history retreats. It suggests lost records, misinterpretation, artistic liberty. It argues that Terra Australis was a hypothetical continent imagined to balance the northern landmasses. A symmetry of belief rather than a product of knowledge. But this explanation falters under scrutiny. Imagined continents do not contain accurate river systems. Hypothetical landmasses do not match buried geology. Speculation does not align with radar data centuries later. The more these maps are examined, the clearer the contradiction becomes. They are too informed to be fictional. And too early to be modern. Which means the knowledge they contain must have come from a source we no longer acknowledge. This is not a fringe claim. It has been discussed quietly by historians, cartographers, and geologists for decades. The problem is not lack of evidence, it is lack of placement. There is no accepted framework into which this knowledge fits. If ancient civilizations possessed advanced cartographic understanding, then history underestimates them. If they had access to Antarctica before it froze, then timelines collapse. If they inherited knowledge from an even earlier culture, then the past stretches further back than we are comfortable admitting. Every possibility destabilizes something. And so the simplest response is dismissal. But dismissal does not erase maps. The documents still exist. The coastlines still align. The rivers still match. And Antarctica remains the missing variable. Because the maps do not show ice. They show land. Which means whoever created the original source material did so when Antarctica was not frozen, or when they had technology capable of seeing beneath the ice. Both possibilities are equally unsettling. And both lead to the same conclusion. Antarctica may have been known long before it was discovered. Not as myth. Not as rumor. But as geography. And geography implies access. Because maps do not exist in isolation. They are products of explorers, sailors, observers, people who go where others cannot. Which raises the next question. If Antarctica appeared on ancient maps, who went there first, and why does history not remember them? Maps do not draw themselves. Every coastline traced on parchment, every mountain sketched in ink, is the result of movement, ships crossing unfamiliar waters, eyes observing distant horizons, minds translating reality into form. If Antarctica appeared on maps before its official discovery, then those maps demand a source. Someone had to go there. And that possibility unsettles history far more than the maps themselves. The traditional narrative insists that Antarctica was inaccessible before the age of modern navigation. The southern oceans were too violent. The cold too severe. The technology too primitive. Ships, we are told, simply could not survive those latitudes. But this assumption rests on a fragile foundation. Ancient and medieval seafarers were not naive adventurers hugging coastlines in fear of the unknown. They crossed oceans with precision, navigated by stars, currents, and winds, and maintained trade networks spanning continents. The Polynesians crossed the Pacific without compasses. Phoenician sailors circumnavigated Africa. Norse explorers reached North America centuries before Columbus. History repeatedly underestimates what ancient navigators could do, until evidence forces a correction. So when early accounts hint at voyages far to the south, they deserve more than dismissal. Greek philosophers spoke of a southern land long before Antarctica appeared on any map. Aristotle referenced a balanced Earth, with landmass in the south countering the north. While often framed as theory, these ideas did not arise in isolation. Greek scholars relied heavily on earlier sources, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and possibly far older traditions. Plato's account of Atlantis, often dismissed as allegory, described a powerful civilization destroyed by sudden catastrophe. Most interpretations place it in the Atlantic, but the text itself emphasizes climate change, flooding, and disappearance beneath the sea. The location remains ambiguous. What matters is not where Atlantis was, but that ancient cultures preserved memories of worlds erased abruptly. And Antarctica fits that pattern disturbingly well. There are also medieval reports that rarely make it into mainstream discussion. Arab geographers described southern lands beyond Africa, marked by extreme cold but not necessarily icebound. Chinese records speak of long southern voyages during the Ming dynasty, with fleets that dwarfed European ships of the same era. Some accounts describe land far beyond known southern limits, lands that were never formally claimed, settled, or named. What happened to those records? Many were lost. Some were destroyed. Others were absorbed into generalized myth. History is not preserved neutrally. It survives through copying, translation, and selection. Records that do not fit dominant narratives are often neglected, not out of malice, but out of irrelevance to prevailing concerns. A voyage that led nowhere permanent leaves no legacy. If explorers reached Antarctica and found it uninhabitable, or watched it freeze, their accounts would have held little practical value. No trade routes. No resources. No empire to build. And so the knowledge would fade. But maps endure differently. Cartographic knowledge often outlives its context. A coastline copied from an older map carries forward even when its origin is forgotten. Rivers remain drawn long after their discoverers are gone. Geography persists where stories vanish. This may explain why Antarctica appears on maps stripped of narrative. The land is there. The details are there. But the story of how they were known is missing. Some historians argue that ancient source maps were inherited from a lost maritime civilization, one capable of advanced navigation and global exploration long before recorded history. This civilization, whatever its identity, may have observed Antarctica during a warm or transitional period, charted its coasts, and passed that knowledge forward. When their culture collapsed, their maps survived, copied, recopied, and misunderstood. This theory is uncomfortable, not because it is provable, but because it is plausible. It accounts for accurate depictions without ice. It explains why no civilization claims discovery. It clarifies why Antarctica appears as geography without history. And it aligns with a broader pattern we are only beginning to recognize. Human history is not a straight line. It is layered. Civilizations rise, peak, collapse, and vanish, sometimes leaving little more than fragments. Floods, volcanic winters, climate shifts, and impacts have repeatedly reset the human story. Each reset erases complexity. What survives becomes ancient. What is lost becomes myth. Antarctica may represent the most extreme example of this process. A place where memory was not just overwritten, but sealed. Which brings us back to silence. The silence surrounding early Antarctic exploration is not evidence of absence. It is the result of interruption. Voyages cut short. Knowledge rendered useless. Records abandoned. And then, centuries later, rediscovered without explanation. Modern explorers arrived at Antarctica believing they were the first. They were not lying. They genuinely had no record of predecessors. The past had been wiped clean. Except for the maps. The maps whispered what history forgot. And now, standing in the present, we face a choice. We can dismiss these anomalies as coincidence, error, and imagination, or we can accept that the past may be more complex than our timelines allow. Because if Antarctica was known before it froze, if it was charted before it vanished beneath ice, then the Black Pyramids are no longer isolated curiosities. They become remnants. Fragments of a chapter written, erased, and half remembered. Because maps and voyages are only the surface layer. In the next part of Part 3, we will examine why certain discoveries fade from record, how knowledge becomes classified or abandoned, and why Antarctica may represent not just forgotten history, but controlled history. Not through conspiracy, but through neglect, policy, and the quiet power of deciding what is worth remembering. History is not only written by those who win. It is written by those who decide what survives. Civilizations do not lose their knowledge all at once. They lose it gradually, through neglect, irrelevance, and the quiet decision that certain information is no longer useful. Libraries burn, yes, but more often, they are simply abandoned. Manuscripts decay. Maps are recopied without understanding. Context dissolves. This is how entire chapters disappear without anyone intending to erase them. Antarctica fits perfectly into this pattern. There is no dramatic moment where the world collectively decided to forget the southern continent. Instead, it slipped out of relevance. Trade routes avoided it. Empires gained nothing from it. Settlement was impossible. Exploration offered no reward. So curiosity faded. And when curiosity fades, memory follows. The ancient world did not operate on the assumption that every land must be conquered or catalogued indefinitely. Knowledge was preserved because it served survival, power, or wealth. A frozen land at the end of the world offered none of these. If early civilizations encountered Antarctica during a warmer or transitional period, their interest would have been temporary. When conditions worsened, when ice advanced and access became dangerous, the land would have been abandoned. What remains of abandoned knowledge? Fragments. A coastline on a map. A mountain range without explanation. A name stripped of context. This is why Antarctica's appearance in early cartography is so strange. It is there, but without narrative. No stories of conquest. No myths of settlement. No heroes attached to its discovery. Just land. This absence of storytelling is unusual. Humans mythologize everything that matters to them. Lands become sacred. Mountains become divine. Seas become monsters. Antarctica did not become myth. It became silence. That silence suggests not ignorance, but disinterest after loss. As history progressed into the modern era, exploration became institutionalized. Knowledge was no longer held by individuals or cultures, it became centralized. Governments funded expeditions. Academies validated discoveries. Records were archived systematically. And Antarctica entered a new phase. Not as a mystery, but as a resource. Climate data. Meteorites. Geological samples. The continent was reframed as a scientific laboratory rather than a historical site. Its value lay in what it could reveal about Earth's climate, not humanity's past. This reframing matters. Once Antarctica was defined as ahistorical, it became protected from historical inquiry by default. Archaeology was never prioritized. No one looked for ruins because no one expected them to exist. Expectation shapes observation. And observation shapes reality. When radar surveys revealed subglacial anomalies, they were interpreted through geological frameworks. When symmetrical features appeared, they were classified as natural. When maps conflicted with timelines, the maps were dismissed. Not because anyone was hiding something, but because the system had no category for it. This is how controlled history works. Not through censorship, but through categorization. If something does not fit an established discipline, it falls between them. If it falls between them, it is not studied. If it is not studied, it does not exist. Antarctica exists in that gap. It is too remote for archaeology. Too historical for geology. Too restricted for exploration. So it remains unresolved. This unresolved status creates a paradox. Antarctica is treated as both pristine and empty, a place untouched by humans and therefore free of human history. But emptiness is an assumption, not a fact. And assumptions, once institutionalized, are difficult to overturn. There is also a psychological dimension to this silence. The idea that advanced knowledge could be lost, truly lost, is unsettling. Modern society prides itself on accumulation. We believe progress is irreversible. That once knowledge is gained, it cannot disappear completely. But history disagrees. The Library of Alexandria vanished. Roman engineering was forgotten for centuries. Ancient medical practices outperformed medieval ones and were lost. Technologies rise and fall repeatedly. Why should cartographic or exploratory knowledge be any different? Antarctica may represent the most extreme case of this phenomenon, not because it was unimportant, but because it became inaccessible. Knowledge without access becomes myth. Myth without relevance becomes trivia. Trivia without context becomes noise. And noise is ignored. The Black Pyramids reintroduce signal. They disrupt the assumption that Antarctica has no story. They force attention onto a continent we have categorized as background rather than foreground. And once attention returns, patterns emerge. Maps without ice. Mountains preserved beneath glacier. Climate shifts abrupt enough to erase habitability. Policies that restrict exploration. Individually, these facts are manageable. Together, they suggest something uncomfortable. That Antarctica may not just be forgotten. It may be unfinished. A chapter that history paused rather than closed. And this brings us to the most important realization of Part 3. Discovery is not always about finding something new. Sometimes, it is about recognizing what was deliberately left behind. Antarctica challenges us because it exists outside the rhythm of human time. It does not decay at our pace. It does not reveal itself easily. It does not reward curiosity quickly. It waits. And waiting places pressure on interpretation. Because the longer something remains unseen, the easier it is to believe it was never there. But belief is not evidence. And Antarctica is full of evidence we have not yet decided how to read. Because the final question of Part 3 is not whether Antarctica was known, mapped, or forgotten. It is this. What happens when modern technology finally begins to see what the ice has hidden, and the results do not align with history? In the next continuation, we will examine recent radar discoveries, classified surveys, and why certain findings are quietly minimized rather than explored. For most of human history, Antarctica was protected by ignorance. Not secrecy, ignorance. The ice was too thick. The conditions too hostile. The technology too limited. Whatever lay beneath the continent remained unreachable not because it was forbidden, but because it was invisible. That changed in the 20th century. Radar technology, originally developed for military and atmospheric purposes, began to transform how scientists understood the Earth. Instead of relying solely on surface observation, researchers could now see through ice, mapping bedrock, detecting voids, and reconstructing landscapes buried beneath kilometers of frozen mass. For the first time, Antarctica began to reveal its hidden anatomy. And what emerged did not resemble an empty continent. Subglacial radar surveys uncovered mountain ranges, deep valleys, massive basins, and vast networks of ancient rivers. Some of these features rivaled those found on exposed continents. Others appeared strangely out of place, flat where chaos was expected, angular where erosion should dominate. One of the most striking revelations was the scale of Antarctica's buried terrain. Beneath the ice lies a continent as complex as any other, shaped by tectonics, water, and time. This alone challenged the idea that Antarctica was always inhospitable. But complexity was not the problem. Structure was. Radar reflections occasionally revealed anomalies, features that did not behave like natural formations. Flat surfaces extended over improbable distances. Sharp transitions appeared between regions shaped by erosion and regions that seemed resistant to it. Linear boundaries cut across terrain where randomness should prevail. Most of these anomalies were explained quickly. Geological quirks. Resolution artifacts. Data noise. And in many cases, those explanations were reasonable. But not all anomalies disappeared under scrutiny. Some persisted across multiple datasets. Different radar systems, different survey angles, different research teams, yet the features remained. Quietly documented. Rarely discussed. Because discussion invites interpretation. And interpretation invites controversy. Modern science is cautious for good reason. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary verification. But caution can become paralysis when data challenges assumptions that are deeply embedded. Antarctica is assumed to have no human past. So any data that hints otherwise is filtered aggressively. This is not censorship. It is normalization. When a signal appears that does not match expectations, the system attempts to reconcile it with known models. If reconciliation fails, the signal is labeled anomalous and set aside. Anomalies accumulate. They wait. One of the most telling aspects of Antarctic research is how little raw data is publicly explored outside specialized fields. Radar maps are published, but interpretation remains conservative. Features are described in technical language stripped of implication. A flat surface is a plateau. A straight boundary is a fault. A symmetrical formation is a coincidental alignment. Language contains uncertainty. And uncertainty is diffused through terminology. This process is not dishonest, but it is selective. Science does not lie. But it does prioritize stability. Which means discoveries that threaten foundational assumptions are approached slowly, sometimes quietly. The Black Pyramids sit within this framework. They are visible. They are documented. They are discussed. But they are never prioritized for direct investigation. No major expeditions are launched to resolve the question definitively. Why? Because resolution is risky. If an expedition confirms a natural origin, the mystery ends quietly. But if it does not, if something unexpected is found, the implications would ripple far beyond geology. History would be forced to respond. And history is not easily rewritten. There is also a practical dimension to this restraint. Antarctica is governed by international agreement. No single nation controls access. Any major excavation or targeted investigation would require cooperation, funding, and justification. Curiosity is not sufficient. And so research continues where answers are safe. Climate models. Ice dynamics. Sea level projections. These are vital fields. They save lives. They inform policy. But they also keep attention away from deeper questions. Questions like: what lies beneath the oldest ice? What existed before the freeze? What might radar not fully reveal? Technology has given us the ability to see outlines, but not context. A radar echo can show shape, but not purpose. It can reveal depth, but not origin. It can map structure, but not story. And story is what Antarctica denies us most effectively. The continent does not volunteer meaning. It must be interpreted. And interpretation requires willingness to consider uncomfortable possibilities. This is where the tension now resides. We have the tools to look deeper than ever before. We have the data to challenge old assumptions. But we lack the framework to integrate what we might find. So the anomalies remain. Not hidden. Not exposed. But waiting. And the longer they wait, the more pressure builds. Because eventually, technology will advance far enough that ambiguity collapses. Ice-penetrating drones. Autonomous subglacial exploration. Precision drilling guided by AI. The ice will yield. And when it does, Antarctica will stop being a blank page. It will become evidence. Because the final stage of this story is not in the past. It is approaching rapidly. In the next continuation of Part 3, we will examine why future discoveries in Antarctica may be the most disruptive in human history, and why the world may not be prepared for what emerges. Every era believes it stands at the peak of understanding. We look back at the past and see ignorance, superstition, incomplete knowledge. We assume that what we know now is closer to truth than what came before, that progress is a straight line moving upward. Antarctica challenges that belief. Not because it offers answers, but because it exposes how much of the past remains inaccessible. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that knowledge can be lost, not temporarily, but completely. That entire chapters of human experience can vanish without leaving behind stories, names, or ruins, only fragments that surface when we least expect them. Maps that should not exist. Voyages without records. Landscapes buried before history learned to write. Antarctica is not mysterious because it hides secrets intentionally. It is mysterious because it exists beyond the reach of normal historical processes. It was sealed before it could be remembered. And once sealed, it stopped participating in the human story. The Black Pyramids are not the center of this mystery. They are the symptom. They represent the moment when modern certainty collides with ancient silence. A shape that looks intentional in a place assumed to be empty. A structure, or mountain, that refuses to sit comfortably within established explanations. Whether natural or artificial, their presence forces a pause. And in that pause, a deeper truth emerges. History is not only shaped by discovery, it is shaped by access. What we can reach, we study. What we cannot reach, we explain away. What we cannot explain, we forget. Antarctica exists in the narrow space between these states. Modern technology has begun to peel back the ice, but it has not yet pierced it. Radar shows outlines but not meaning. Data reveals form but not origin. We stand at the threshold of knowing, close enough to sense disruption, far enough to deny it. This threshold is where narratives fracture. If Antarctica was once habitable, then it was once part of the living world. If it was part of the living world, then it may have been part of the human world, or of worlds that came before us. And if those worlds were erased rapidly, then history is not missing pages by accident. It is missing them because the Earth itself intervened. There is no need for conspiracy to explain this loss. No hidden hand guiding silence. Ice alone is sufficient. Distance alone is enough. Policy, practicality, and disinterest complete the process. The result is the same. A continent treated as timeless when it is anything but. A past treated as empty when it may simply be unreachable. Antarctica does not demand belief in lost civilizations or ancient architects. It demands humility. It asks us to admit that certainty is often a privilege of limited perspective. The greatest discoveries in human history did not come from answers, they came from questions that refused to disappear. And Antarctica is one such question. It stands at the edge of the world not as a frozen void, but as a reminder that the planet remembers more than we do. That time does not erase, it buries. And that what is buried is not gone. Just waiting. Because the next chapter is not about the past. It is about what happens when the ice finally opens. In Part 4, we will move from theory to consequence, exploring what discovery in Antarctica would mean for religion, science, power, and human identity, and why the truth, whatever it is, may be more disruptive than comforting. Some discoveries change history. Others change what it means to be human. Not all discoveries are equal. Some fill gaps in textbooks. Some correct dates. Some refine theories. But there are rare discoveries that do something far more dangerous. They change the frame itself. Antarctica belongs to that category. If what lies beneath the ice is ever confirmed to be more than geology, more than coincidence, the consequences will not remain confined to laboratories or academic journals. They will ripple outward, touching every system built on assumptions about where humanity came from and how unique our story truly is. This is why Antarctica has remained, until now, a place of cautious curiosity rather than direct confrontation. Because discovery there would not be academic. It would be existential. Modern science is built on a timeline. A carefully structured sequence of events that explains how life emerged, how intelligence developed, and how civilization formed. That timeline is not arbitrary, it is supported by evidence, refined through decades of research. But it is also incomplete. And incompleteness becomes visible when anomalies appear that do not fit. If Antarctica reveals evidence of organized structures predating known civilization, the immediate question will not be who built them. It will be how wrong are we? Because such a discovery would not require a minor adjustment. It would require a re-evaluation of human capability, chronology, and continuity. It would suggest that intelligence may have risen earlier, organized itself differently, and possibly vanished without leaving a trace except in places sealed by time. This destabilizes a core belief of modern identity. That we are the first. That intelligence has been steadily progressing toward us. That the past is primitive and the present is advanced. Antarctica threatens that hierarchy. And hierarchy matters. Because modern systems, educational, political, cultural, are built on narratives of progress. We justify authority, expertise, and direction by assuming we stand at the most informed point in history. A forgotten civilization undermines that assumption. It suggests that progress is not linear. That knowledge can rise, peak, and disappear. That humanity may not be climbing upward, but cycling, forgetting as often as it remembers. Science can adapt to this idea. Institutions struggle. But science is only one pillar. Religion faces a different challenge. Most belief systems are not threatened by age, they are threatened by precedents. The idea that civilization, morality, or advanced organization existed long before recorded sacred histories forces reinterpretation. Not destruction, but recalibration. And recalibration is uncomfortable. Because faith is built not only on belief, but on placement in time. Creation stories, prophetic sequences, divine intervention, all are anchored to timelines that assume a certain order. Antarctica does not contradict faith directly. It complicates it. And complexity is harder to defend against than denial. Then there is power. Nations do not compete only over land and resources, they compete over narrative. Whoever defines the past influences the future. Control over discovery is control over interpretation. Antarctica, governed by international agreement, exists outside traditional ownership. No nation can claim it. No single authority can control it. This makes any major discovery there uniquely destabilizing. Who announces it? Who interprets it? Who benefits? A discovery that cannot be nationalized cannot be easily managed. Which is why the idea of uncovering something world-altering beneath the ice produces hesitation rather than excitement. Delay rather than urgency. Silence rather than proclamation. Because once discovery happens, control is lost. And control matters when the truth threatens identity. The Black Pyramids, whether symbolic or literal, sit at the edge of this realization. They represent the moment when evidence moves from abstract to tangible. When speculation gains form. When denial becomes effort rather than default. They ask a question modern society is not trained to answer. What if we are not the beginning? What if we are not the peak? What if history is not a straight line, but a cycle of emergence and erasure? Antarctica forces that question not through drama, but through patience. It waits beneath ice that melts slowly. It reveals itself reluctantly. It refuses to be rushed. And that may be the most unsettling aspect of all. Because the truth, whatever it is, will not arrive on our schedule. It will emerge when conditions allow, and when it does, the world will not be able to respond as if it were just another discovery. It will respond as if something foundational has shifted. Because the final question is no longer what lies beneath the ice. It is whether humanity is ready to accept what it might mean. In the next continuation of Part 4, we will explore why societies resist paradigm-shifting discoveries, how truth is delayed without being hidden, and why Antarctica may force a reckoning not with the past, but with ourselves. There is a misconception that humanity resists truth because it is frightening. In reality, humanity resists truth because it is disruptive. Most societies are not built to accommodate constant revision. They are built on stability, on shared assumptions that allow millions of people to agree on what matters, what is possible, and what lies ahead. When those assumptions fracture, uncertainty spreads. And uncertainty is destabilizing. This is why paradigm-shifting discoveries are rarely welcomed at first. History provides countless examples. When Earth was no longer the center of the universe, resistance was immediate. When deep time challenged the idea of a young planet, denial followed. When evolution suggested humanity was not uniquely created, outrage erupted. Each discovery did not merely add information, it displaced meaning. Antarctica carries the same potential. If evidence beneath the ice suggests that civilization, intelligence, or organized society existed far earlier than accepted timelines allow, the reaction will not be celebration. It will be hesitation, delay, careful language, technical framing. Not because scientists are dishonest, but because institutions are cautious. Truth does not exist in isolation. It interacts with belief, economy, education, and power. A truth that forces all of these systems to adjust is not released casually. This is why discoveries that challenge foundational narratives often move slowly from data to acceptance. They are not suppressed. They are softened, reframed, normalized. Antarctica is especially vulnerable to this process because it exists far from public oversight. Few people can travel there. Fewer still understand the science involved. Data is complex, technical, and easy to abstract. A finding beneath Antarctic ice can be discussed in journals without ever becoming cultural knowledge. And cultural knowledge is where disruption truly occurs. The deeper reason Antarctica unsettles us is not fear of the unknown, it is fear of reinterpretation. If we are not the first advanced intelligence, then our role in history shifts. If knowledge can be lost completely, then progress becomes fragile. If civilizations can vanish without memory, then modern society is not immune. This realization erodes confidence. And confidence is the currency of power. Political systems rely on predictability. Educational systems rely on settled narratives. Economic systems rely on continuity. A discovery that implies repeated rises and collapses undermines all three. Because it suggests that no system is permanent. That realization is profoundly destabilizing. And so resistance does not look like censorship. It looks like patience. Calls for more data. Requests for replication. Emphasis on uncertainty. A preference for explanations that preserve existing frameworks. None of this is malicious. It is human. Antarctica magnifies this instinct because it offers no urgency. Ice melts slowly. Excavation takes decades. Questions can be postponed without consequence, or so it seems. But postponement has a cost. It delays adaptation. It delays humility. It delays the opportunity to learn from past failures that may not be recorded anywhere else on Earth. If a civilization existed before ours and collapsed due to climate instability, environmental mismanagement, or sudden catastrophe, Antarctica may be the only place where physical traces survived. And ignoring that possibility means ignoring lessons that could matter deeply. This is why the resistance to Antarctic discovery is not about fear of ancient builders or lost technologies. It is about fear of vulnerability. Because acknowledging that civilization has failed before implies it can fail again. And that is a truth modern society finds difficult to integrate. Antarctica does not threaten us with mystery. It threatens us with perspective. It reminds us that we are not outside Earth's cycles, we are inside them. Subject to the same forces that erased forests, froze continents, and buried entire landscapes without warning. The ice does not care about progress. It does not care about intelligence. It preserves and destroys without judgment. And this neutrality is unsettling. Because it means meaning is not guaranteed. Which leads to the final tension of Part 4. The question is no longer whether Antarctica hides something. The question is whether we are psychologically prepared for what it might reveal. Because the last consequence of discovery is not scientific or political. It is personal. In the final section of Part 4, we will confront what it means for human identity if we are not unique, not first, and not permanent, and why that realization may ultimately be the most difficult to accept. Every civilization tells itself a story. Not just about where it is going, but about where it came from. These origin stories are not trivial. They define identity. They explain suffering. They justify progress. They reassure us that chaos has meaning and that history moves toward something better. Antarctica threatens these stories not by contradicting them outright, but by asking whether they are complete. If evidence beneath the ice suggests that intelligence, organization, or advanced knowledge existed before our accepted timelines, then humanity is no longer a singular event. We become one expression among many, not the first spark of awareness, but perhaps the latest. This realization does not diminish humanity, but it humbles it. Modern identity is deeply tied to uniqueness. We see ourselves as the point where evolution became conscious of itself. The species that learned, remembered, and built forward without forgetting. Antarctica introduces a disturbing alternative. That forgetting may be inevitable. That memory is fragile. That intelligence does not guarantee continuity. If entire worlds can vanish beneath ice, then permanence is an illusion. If civilizations can rise and collapse without record, then history is not a ladder, it is a wave. And waves do not remember the ones that came before. This perspective changes how we see progress. It reframes innovation not as ascent, but as recovery. Each civilization may be rediscovering truths already known, rebuilding tools already invented, solving problems already solved and forgotten. The Black Pyramids, whether natural or artificial, symbolize this uncertainty. They stand as shapes without explanation, forms without context. They resist closure. And resistance is powerful. Because it forces reflection. If we are not the first, then responsibility deepens. If collapse has happened before, then warning signs matter. If the planet resets itself, then survival depends on understanding cycles rather than denying them. Antarctica reminds us that Earth is not obligated to preserve our achievements. It does not archive meaning. It records conditions. Ice advances when thresholds are crossed. Oceans rise when balances shift. Landscapes vanish without negotiation. Human intelligence may adapt, but only if it accepts vulnerability. This is the final discomfort of discovery. Not fear of ancient builders. Not shock at lost civilizations. But recognition that nothing we build is guaranteed to last. That the future will judge us not by what we knew, but by what we learned from what was forgotten. Antarctica does not speak. It does not accuse. It simply exists as proof that the planet can erase almost everything, and that what remains is often accidental. A map copied too many times. A structure frozen mid-existence. A question unanswered long enough to survive. And now, at the edge of discovery, humanity stands where it always has before transformation. Between certainty and humility. Between mastery and awareness. Between believing the story is about us and realizing we may only be a chapter. Because the next stage of this journey is no longer about ice, maps, or ancient possibilities. It is about what comes next. In Part 5, we will explore future scenarios, what happens as ice melts, technology advances, and access becomes unavoidable, and how humanity may respond when Antarctica finally stops being silent. Some truths stay buried forever. Others surface precisely when we are least prepared to face them. For most of human history, Antarctica remained protected by distance. The storms were too violent. The cold too absolute. The cost too high. The continent did not need walls or guardians. Geography itself was enough. That protection is now weakening. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. But undeniably. Rising global temperatures have begun to alter Antarctica's surface behavior. Ice shelves thin. Glaciers accelerate. Meltwater pools where none existed before. These changes do not reveal the continent all at once, but they expose pressure points, fractures, and vulnerabilities that did not exist a century ago. Antarctica is no longer static. And motion changes everything. As ice dynamics shift, access follows. What was once unreachable becomes logistically possible. What once required state-level resources may soon be within reach of private organizations, autonomous systems, and AI-guided exploration. This is not speculation. It is trajectory. Autonomous drilling platforms already operate in extreme environments. Ice-penetrating radar grows more precise each decade. Subglacial drones are being designed to navigate beneath ice sheets and sealed lakes. Artificial intelligence now interprets geological data faster than human teams ever could. The question is no longer if Antarctica will be explored more deeply. It is how fast, and by whom. And speed matters. Because discovery rarely arrives gently when access accelerates faster than interpretation. History shows this pattern clearly. New lands were not understood before they were exploited. New technologies were not ethically integrated before they reshaped societies. Discovery often outruns wisdom. Antarctica may be no different. The moment physical confirmation replaces speculation, the moment something beneath the ice is no longer abstract, reaction will precede reflection. Media will frame it. Governments will respond. Institutions will position themselves. And meaning will be contested. This is the paradox of future discovery. The deeper Antarctica is explored, the less control humanity will have over how findings are understood. Information spreads instantly. Interpretation fragments. Authority competes with narrative. A single image, removed from context, could ignite global debate. A structure. A pattern. A material anomaly. Truth will not emerge fully formed. It will arrive in pieces. And pieces invite projection. This is why the future of Antarctic discovery is not just a scientific question. It is a social one. Because societies do not react to uncertainty with patience. They react with myth, fear, and meaning-making. When confronted with evidence that challenges identity, people do not ask what is true first. They ask, what does this mean for me? Antarctica will force that question. If the continent reveals evidence of a forgotten civilization, the immediate concern will not be archaeological methodology. It will be existential implication. Religious reinterpretation. Political leverage. Cultural anxiety. If the discovery suggests that climate catastrophe erased a previous world, attention will turn inward, toward modern vulnerability. If the findings remain ambiguous, uncertainty itself will become destabilizing. Because ambiguity does not satisfy. It provokes. This is why the slow unveiling of Antarctica may be more disruptive than a single definitive discovery. Each partial reveal will raise questions without resolving them. Each expedition will uncover more context without closure. The ice will recede in fragments. And so will certainty. Antarctica is entering a phase no other continent has experienced, a transition from sealed archive to active question mark. From silence to signal. And humanity has never handled that transition well. We prefer clean revelations. We prefer answers with authority. We prefer conclusions. Antarctica offers none of these. It offers process. And process requires patience, something modern civilization struggles to sustain. Because as access increases, another force awakens alongside discovery. Competition. In the next continuation of Part 5, we will explore who will reach Antarctica's deepest secrets first, how geopolitics and private power reshape exploration, and why the future of the frozen continent may be decided faster than humanity can morally prepare for. Discovery does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in a world shaped by competition. As Antarctica becomes more accessible, curiosity will not be the only force driving exploration. The continent may belong to no nation on paper, but interest in it is far from neutral. Where knowledge carries power, power follows. And power rarely waits patiently. The Antarctic Treaty was written in an era when access was limited and technology was slow. Its purpose was preservation, to prevent military conflict, territorial claims, and unchecked exploitation. For decades, the treaty succeeded because Antarctica was simply too difficult to reach in any meaningful way. Difficulty in forced cooperation. But difficulty is no longer guaranteed. As technology lowers the cost of entry, new actors emerge. Private research firms, autonomous exploration programs, corporate-funded science initiatives, nations operating through proxy institutions rather than flags. Exploration becomes deniable. Discovery becomes ambiguous. Ownership becomes interpretive. This is where competition accelerates. Not for land, but for first access to information. Who sees something first controls the narrative around it. Who frames a discovery shapes how it is understood. In the modern world, information does not need to be owned to be weaponized, it only needs to be released at the right moment. Antarctica's future may not be decided by conquest, but by timing. A single leaked image could trigger global speculation before peer review ever occurs. A partial dataset could fuel myths faster than facts can stabilize. The slower, careful pace of science struggles to compete with the velocity of modern communication. And this creates pressure. Researchers may feel compelled to announce early. Institutions may rush interpretation. Governments may respond before understanding fully forms. The result is a feedback loop. Discovery, reaction, polarization, control. And once polarization begins, nuance disappears. If Antarctica reveals something ambiguous, a structure that could be natural or artificial, a material that does not fit known processes, interpretations will diverge immediately. Some will see evidence of lost civilizations. Others will dismiss it as error. Still others will see opportunity. Truth becomes secondary to alignment. This is not hypothetical. We have seen this pattern repeatedly in modern society. Complex findings are reduced to headlines. Uncertainty is framed as proof of intent. Debate becomes identity. Antarctica is particularly vulnerable to this distortion because it already carries symbolic weight. It represents extremes. Boundaries. Ends of the world. Anything discovered there will inherit that symbolism. And symbolism spreads faster than explanation. This is why competition beneath the ice is more dangerous than cooperation above it. It shifts the goal from understanding to advantage. From patience to priority. And once advantage becomes the objective, restraint erodes. The irony is that Antarctica's greatest protection, its remoteness, may become its greatest weakness. As access expands, oversight becomes fragmented. No single authority can slow discovery without appearing obstructive. No consensus can form fast enough to guide interpretation responsibly. The future of Antarctic exploration may unfold faster than humanity's ability to integrate its consequences. And this leads to a sobering realization. The greatest risk is not that Antarctica hides something extraordinary. The greatest risk is that we uncover something profound in a way that fractures rather than enlightens. Because discovery does not guarantee wisdom. It only guarantees exposure. Because competition is only one side of the future. The other is responsibility. In the final continuation of Part 5, we will confront what choices humanity still has, whether restraint is possible, and whether Antarctica can be approached not as a prize, but as a mirror reflecting what kind of civilization we have become. Every generation believes the future will arrive the same way the past did. Gradually. Predictably. On terms that allow adjustment. But history does not support that belief. Transformational moments do not wait for consensus. They arrive when conditions align, technological, environmental, psychological, and then they move faster than interpretation can follow. Antarctica is approaching such a moment. The ice is thinning. The tools are advancing. The distance is shrinking. And with each shift, the question becomes less about what will be found and more about how humanity will respond when it is. Because response defines outcome. If Antarctica reveals evidence of a forgotten world, the discovery itself will be neutral. It will not instruct us. It will not explain itself. Meaning will be imposed by those who encounter it, shaped by fear, wonder, ambition, or restraint. That is the real test. Not whether we can uncover truth, but whether we can live with it. History shows that humanity often treats discovery as entitlement. Lands become resources. Knowledge becomes leverage. Mystery becomes commodity. We extract before we understand, name before we listen, and claim before we reflect. Antarctica challenges that instinct. It is the last place on Earth where restraint is still possible. Where discovery has not yet been converted into ownership. Where humanity has a chance, perhaps the last one, to decide whether exploration must always lead to dominance. This is why Antarctica matters more than any single anomaly beneath its ice. It is not just a location. It is a decision point. If we rush, we may repeat the same pattern that erased whatever came before. If we compete, we may fracture meaning before understanding forms. If we seek control, we may learn nothing except how fragile our systems truly are. But if we pause, truly pause, Antarctica offers something rare. Perspective. It reminds us that civilization is not guaranteed. That intelligence does not exempt us from planetary cycles. That progress without humility leads not forward, but back to silence. The ice has preserved more than land. It has preserved consequence. Whatever lies beneath Antarctica survived because it was sealed away from interference. Its endurance is not proof of superiority, it is proof of isolation. And that distinction matters. We stand now where the past and future overlap. Behind us, forgotten worlds, lost knowledge, erased timelines. Ahead of us, expanding access, accelerating discovery, unavoidable exposure. Between them lies choice. And choice is the one element history rarely records clearly. Because outcomes overshadow intentions. Antarctica does not demand that we believe in ancient civilizations or lost architects. It asks something far simpler and far more difficult. To recognize that knowing more does not automatically make us wiser. That discovery without responsibility is just another form of collapse. That the true legacy of our civilization will not be what we uncover, but how we respond when the planet finally reveals what it has kept hidden. The ice is yielding. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But enough. Enough to remind us that silence does not last forever. Because the final question is no longer about Antarctica. It is about us. In Part 6, we will confront the ultimate implication of everything revealed so far, whether humanity is capable of breaking the cycle, or whether discovery will once again arrive too late to change the outcome. Some truths illuminate the future. Others warn it. Every civilization inherits two things from the past: knowledge and blindness. We inherit what survived long enough to be passed forward, and we remain unaware of everything that did not. This imbalance shapes how societies understand themselves. We mistake survival for superiority. Continuity for inevitability. Antarctica dismantles that illusion. Not through revelation, but through implication. If worlds existed before ours and were erased without warning, then continuity is not guaranteed. Survival becomes conditional. Intelligence becomes vulnerable. Progress becomes reversible. This is the quiet warning embedded beneath the ice. Human history is often described as a story of advancement, fire, language, agriculture, industry, technology. Each step framed as movement away from fragility. Yet Antarctica suggests a counterpattern: intelligence rises, complexity grows, and then something intervenes. Climate shifts. Geological upheaval. Ecological collapse. Not as punishment, but as process. The Earth does not reset civilizations because they fail morally. It resets conditions when thresholds are crossed. Ice advances. Oceans rise. Balance reasserts itself without regard for achievement. This is the cycle humanity rarely confronts honestly. Because confronting it requires accepting limits. Antarctica forces that acceptance. If a civilization was erased there, it was not because it lacked intelligence, it was because intelligence alone was insufficient. Knowledge without restraint does not protect against planetary systems. Technology without humility accelerates imbalance. This is the lesson modern humanity struggles to integrate. We believe solutions will arrive faster than consequences. That innovation will outpace collapse. That adaptation will always be possible. Antarctica suggests otherwise. It implies that adaptation has windows, and those windows close. Breaking the cycle, then, does not mean avoiding catastrophe entirely. It means recognizing warning signs early enough to change behavior before thresholds are crossed. But this requires something unprecedented: collective restraint. Civilizations are excellent at expansion, poor at contraction. Growth is rewarded. Limits are resisted. Yet cycles demand balance, not acceleration. Antarctica is a mirror reflecting this dilemma. We can approach it as conquerors of knowledge, extracting answers as quickly as possible. Or we can approach it as witnesses, allowing discovery to reshape how we live, not just what we know. That distinction defines whether the cycle repeats. Because the cycle is not technological. It is psychological. The inability to believe collapse applies to us. Every civilization that fell believed itself exceptional. Modern humanity is no different. Our confidence is simply reinforced by digital memory, global communication, and unprecedented reach. But reach does not equal resilience. Antarctica preserved silence because silence was adaptive. Nothing disturbed it. Nothing accelerated it. Nothing extracted meaning prematurely. Now that silence is ending. And with it comes responsibility. Not to preserve mystery forever, but to ensure that discovery does not become repetition. Breaking the cycle does not require abandoning progress. It requires redefining it. Progress not as domination over environment, but alignment with it. Not as speed, but sustainability. Not as accumulation, but continuity. Antarctica offers humanity one final advantage. Forewarning. Unlike whatever came before, we have data. Climate models. Geological records. Historical analogues. We can see thresholds approaching. What remains uncertain is not knowledge. It is choice. Because recognizing the cycle is only the beginning. In the next continuation of Part 6, we will explore what happens if humanity fails to break it, what the end of a technological civilization might actually look like, and why the next silence may be far deeper than the last. Every civilization eventually reaches a moment where knowledge is no longer the limiting factor. Choice becomes the boundary. By the time a society can see the patterns of its own collapse, the environmental signals, the historical parallels, the accelerating feedback loops, ignorance is no longer an excuse. What remains is willingness. Antarctica represents that moment for humanity. Not as a prophecy, but as evidence. It stands as proof that the Earth has erased complexity before. That intelligence alone does not ensure survival. That silence can follow sophistication just as easily as it follows absence. Whatever lies beneath the ice, whether ruins or rivers, structures or stone, matters less than why it remained untouched. It survived not because it was powerful, but because it was removed from interference. Isolation preserved what expansion destroyed elsewhere. That is the paradox modern humanity must confront. We expand to understand. We extract to progress. We accelerate to secure the future. Yet the very forces we trust may be the ones that erase us. If a previous world collapsed under rapid climate shift, resource imbalance, or environmental threshold breach, then Antarctica is not an anomaly. It is a warning preserved in ice. Breaking the cycle does not require humanity to retreat into fear or abandon exploration. It requires a recalibration of ambition. A shift from dominance to stewardship. From certainty to humility. This is not a moral argument. It is a survival one. The Earth does not respond to intention. It responds to balance. When balance breaks, correction follows, indifferent, precise, and irreversible on human timescales. Antarctica teaches this lesson without words. It does not accuse. It does not explain. It does not persuade. It simply remains as evidence that silence is what follows when thresholds are crossed too far, too fast. Modern humanity stands at a rare point in time. We are early enough to change trajectory, late enough to see the consequences. This combination has never existed before. Previous civilizations likely did not understand what was happening as it happened. They adapted locally, rationalized globally, and vanished quietly. Their end was not dramatic, it was gradual, normalized, and final. We are different in one crucial way. We can see the pattern. Antarctica is part of that vision, not as mystery, but as context. It expands history backward and consequence forward. It reminds us that intelligence without restraint is not progress. It is acceleration toward erasure. Whether humanity becomes a break in the cycle or another repetition will not be decided by what is found beneath the ice. It will be decided by how we live once we know. If we treat discovery as possession, the silence will return. If we treat knowledge as leverage, the cycle will continue. If we treat Antarctica as a mirror rather than a prize, something unprecedented becomes possible. Not permanence, but continuity. The ice will melt or advance again. The planet will rebalance as it always has. What remains uncertain is whether this civilization will still be here, remembered not as another forgotten layer beneath history, but as the one that finally understood what the silence was trying to say.